Hello and welcome back. In this video, you're going to learn how to build apps using Langchain, a cutting-edge framework that lets you use language models like ChatGPT in a whole new way. Language models are awesome, but they do have limitations. They can only respond to simple prompts, and they might not know much about your specific domain, business, or your own data. Langchain solves these problems by adding two superpowers to your language models. First, it makes them data aware. This means you can connect your language model to any data source or knowledge base you want, like a database. Second, it makes them agentic, which means they can now use tools and interact with their environment. In this series, I'm going to show you how you can use Langchain to create amazing AI-driven apps. Langchain has support for both Python as well as JavaScript or TypeScript. In this video, we're going to focus on the JavaScript version of this framework. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to create your own AI assistant that can search the web for the most up-to-date answers to your questions. Let's talk about the prerequisites. This video is beginner friendly and you only need a basic understanding of JavaScript to follow along. Since we'll be using Node in this video, we need to install Node on our machines. So head over to nodejs.org and install the LTS version of Node. You will also need a code editor, and in this video I'll be using VS Code. You can find the link to both Node and VS Code in the description of this video. Then go ahead and create a new folder on your PC and open that folder in VS Code. We now need to instantiate a new Node project. We can do this by opening the terminal, new terminal, and in the terminal we need to run the following command: npm init-y. After executing this command, you should see this package.json file in your folder. Now that we have our Node environment set up, we need to go ahead and install Langchain. So again, in the terminal, we need to run the following command: npm install-s Langchain. This will now install all the packages and dependencies for using Langchain. Now that we've installed Langchain, we can start building our first application. Our first step is to decide on the language model that we'd like to use. Langchain offers integration with several popular LLMs, which includes OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, Hugging Face, Cohere, Replicate, etc. And Langchain is constantly adding additional support to the framework. Because we want to have a look at extending the core functionality of ChatGPT, we'll be integrating with the OpenAI LLM. So let's create a very basic app that will generate a unique business name based on the business's description. So in the root of our project, let's create a new file and let's call that file demo.js. The first thing we need to do is import the LLM that we want to use in our project. So at the top of this file, I'll type import OpenAI from Langchain LLMs / and after hitting / we can see this drop-down list appear with all the different LLM models like Cohere, Hugging Face, OpenAI, Replicate, etc. In our scenario, we want to select OpenAI, and from OpenAI we are importing the OpenAI class. So after importing the OpenAI class, we need to create an instance of that class. And we can call this whatever we want. I'll just call this model. And I'll set that equal to new OpenAI. So we are creating a new instance of this OpenAI wrapper. OpenAI takes in an object as a parameter, and this object requires two properties to be passed to it. The first is our OpenAI API Key, and next is the temperature. So in order for us to integrate with OpenAI, we need to provide it an OpenAI API Key, which will generate next. The temperature property tells the AI how creative it's allowed to get with the answers. A value of 0 means it needs to be strict with its answers, so no creativity is allowed. A temperature of 1 represents full control in terms of creativity. And because we want the AI to be creative in generating business names, I'll just give it a value of 0.9. Let's go ahead and get our OpenAI API key. So in order to do that, you need to go to platform.openai.com, create a new account, and after creating your account, you should be presented with a screen like this. So from here, at the top right corner, click on Personal and then click on View API Keys. From here, click on Create New Secret Key. You can then give your key a name like Langchain Demo. We can then click on Create Secret Key, and then you need to copy this key. Then back in our project, we can paste that key in between these quotes. Please note that I'm going to delete this key after this recording is done. so please use your own key. Now that we've instantiated a new instance of the OpenAI class, we can now interface with this model. So let's test that out. On the model instance, we can hit period to see all the available functions on this object. So for now, I'll just select the call method, and within call, we can pass in our prompt. Something like, what would be a good company name for a company that makes colorful socks? So what this will do is this line of code will pass this prompt to the OpenAI API, and it will return a response from the model. I'm just going to close this window a bit so we've got some more room. This call function is a promise which we need to await. And we also want to assign the response to a variable. So I'll type const res for response equals await model.call. And let's go ahead and write the response to the console. We can now test this out by going to our terminal and typing node and the name of the file, which we've called demo. When I execute this, I'm getting this cannot use import statement outside of a module error. And we can resolve that by going to the package file. And then in the package file, perhaps just below this license value, we can add a new value called type module. And we can save that. Let's try to run this again. And after running this, we get this response back from the model. Funky footwear socks. Great. This means our integration with OpenAI is working. It's best practice to store private key values like this in an environment variable file. So let's set that up real quick. For this, we need to install a new package. So in the terminal, we can type npm install .env. This will allow us to use environment variable files in our project. Then at the root of our project, we can create a new file called .env. In the .env file, we can now specify the variable name, which I'll call OpenAI _ API _ key. And I'm just going to cut this from this file and paste it in the environment variable file, and I'll save this. Something to note is the name of this variable is important, as Langchain will automatically look at the environment variable file and it will look for the specific variable name. And that means that we no longer have to populate this value here. So I'll just remove it completely. And Langchain will automatically try and find that value in the environment variable file. So what we need to do then is import a few things from .env. So we need to import all as .env from .env. And then on .env, we need to call .config with parentheses. And we can now save this. If we run this again, the model should still work. So in the terminal, let's run node demo. And we got a response back for fancy footwear. Great. Next, let's talk about prompt templates. What prompt templates allow us to do is to take the input from the user and to reformat it in a specific way that our model will understand. So as an example, in this application, we would typically want the user to provide only the description of the company, like makes colorful socks, in some input field on the front end. We then want to take this input and format it into a prompt string like this. And this will ensure consistency across all our users. Luckily, Langchain makes it very easy to construct these templates. What we can do is, at the top of our code, we can import prompt template from Langchain /prompts. Then we can specify a new variable, and I'll just call it template for now. And we can then take this string and then assign that to the template variable instead. And then we will replace this text, which should be dynamic input from the user, with a kind of a variable or placeholder. So we can do that by passing in curly braces. Within the curly braces, we can give this thing a unique variable name, something like product. Now that we have this template, we can now create a new instance of the prompt template field. So I'll call const prompt template equals new prompt template, which takes an object as input. And prompt template needs two properties. The first is the template, which we also called template up here. The second is the input variables, which is an array of values. And in input variables, we can specify the list of variable names in this template string. We only have this one called product, and that's what I'll pass in here. We can now have a look at what this function will do to the template string by typing const. I'll just call this something like formatted prompt, which is equal to prompt template dot format, and format takes in an object and the value of this object will be the variable name, which we called product, and then the value for product, which was colorful socks. This format function returns a promise, which we need to await. We can now write the formatted prompt to the console to see its value. So let's go ahead and run this. So for now, I'm just going to comment out this code over here. So let's run the script. So in the terminal, I'll run node demo. And now we can see this formatted string. Great. We now have a reusable template, which takes in dynamic values. So back in our code, I'm going to remove this console log. And I'm also going to add back in the creation of our model, and I'll actually delete this code here. And I'll also remove this formatted prompt code over here. So now we're only left with the prompt template as well as the model. So up until now, we've been interfacing with the prompt template and the model directly. But in Langchain, you want to take these two components and chain them together. And fundamentally, that is how Langchain works. We create several components, and then we use Langchain to bring it all together. So to create a chain, all we have to do is, at the top of our code, we need to import an LLM chain from Langchain/chains. Note that there are many different types of chains that you can use with Langchain, and we'll be having a look at quite a few of these within this series. But because we are simply taking a prompt and passing it to an LLM, we'll be using the LLM chain class. So below our model definition, I will create a new instance of the LLM chain. The LLM chain takes in an object as input. It's expecting a property for the LLM that we want to use. So our LLM was defined as model up here. And then secondly, it needs the prompt. And for the prompt value, we'll pass in our prompt template. So previously, we called model directly, and we called the call method on the model, and we then passed the prompt to it. But what we did now is we created a new chain, and we tied our model and the prompt template together using this chain. So what we can do now is on chain, we can call its call method instead, and this takes in an object as a parameter, and within this object we need to pass in the value of this variable over here, which we called product. So I'll call it product followed by a value like colorful socks. So call returns a promise, which we need to await, and we'll assign this response to a variable like so. So if we just have a look at the code again, we defined our prompt template using this template string, and we assigned a variable called product. We then instantiated the new instance of the OpenAI class, and we then used the chain to tie the model and the prompt together. And now we are calling the call method on the chain, passing in a value for that variable. Let's console log this response. Let's run this in our terminal. I'll just clear this for now, and let's run node demo. And after running this, we receive feedback from our chain, and it's given us back this text with rainbow socks co. And there you go. You've now created your very first Langchain application. So let's start talking about the real reason you're here. Langchain adds some advanced functionality to our models by introducing the concept of agents and tools. So let's first talk about agents. Langchain uses agents to use our LLMs to determine which action it needs to take next. This action can be to use a tool to fetch information or to interact with its environment, like writing files, etc. Or it can take the output from one LLM and then pass that to another LLM for further processing. We also have the concept of tools. So tools allow our LLM to perform some advanced functions. A tool is there to perform a specific function and extends the capabilities of the LLM. An example of a tool is the ability for the LLM to go online and perform Google searches. So let's put agents and tools to the test. Let's create an application which uses OpenAI as the LLM and will give our LLM the ability to go online and Google information. We will also provide our LLM with a calculator tool to help it in its ability to perform accurate calculations. So let's do that. In the root of our project, let's create a new file for this. I will call this agent.js. At the top of the file, I'm actually going to close these other files as we no longer need them. At the top of the file, let's import our environment variables. Then let's also import OpenAI from Langchain/LLMs/OpenAI. Then let's create a new instance of our model. I will call this variable model, which is equal to OpenAI, new OpenAI. And in the parameter list, we'll set the temperature to 0. I'm setting the temperature to 0 because we will be asking our model to perform mathematical calculations and we don't want it to get creative. Now that we have our model, we also want to specify the list of tools that Langchain should make available to the model. We can do that by creating a new variable called tools, which is an array of values. So what I want to do is I want to provide a tool to our model which will allow it to go online and search for information using Google. Secondly, I also want to provide a calculator tool to our model. We need to import these tools from Langchain. You can do that by importing something from Langchain/tools. And what I want to import here is the SERP API. SERP API is one of the many tools that's been made available to Langchain for browsing the internet. We also want to import the calculator, which we can get from Langchain/tools/calculator. And from calculator, we want to import calculator. Then in the tools array, we can specify a list of all tools that should be made available to our model. The first tool that we want to make available is an instance of SERP API. SERP API takes in a couple of parameters. The first value is the API key for SERP API. Let's go and get that value. So what you need to do is go to serpapi.com and then register your account. After logging in, you should see your private API key over here. Just go ahead and copy this key. Then, back in your project, go to the .env file and create a new variable called serpapi_API_key. And then add your API key over here. Then, back in our agents.js file, we can provide this API key by typing process.env.serpapi_key. SERP API needs a second attribute as well, which is an object. And for this object, we can simply specify an HL value of English and a GL value of US. Optionally, you can also specify the location, and this will assist the agent to perform Google searches relevant to your location. I'll just leave this blank. The second tool that I want to make available is a new instance of the calculator, which doesn't take in any parameters. So now that we have our model, as well as the list of tools, we can now get Langchain to trigger an agent to manage the input to our model and to assign tools when the model needs assistance to get the answers. So in order to execute our agent, we need to import something from Langchain. So at the top of our code, we'll import initialize agent executor with options, and we can import that from Langchain/agents. So below tools, we can create a new variable called executor, which will await initialize agent executor with options. This takes in a few parameters. First are the list of tools, then the model. Then we need to pass in an object with a property called agent type, which we will set equal to zero-shot React description. We can see the different agent types in the Langchain documentation. In our case, we're using a zero-shot React description. And if we look at the documentation, this is saying that if you're using a text large language model, first try a zero-shot React description. If you're using a chat model, then try chat zero-shot React description. And if you're using a chat model and want to use memory, try chat conversational React description. In our example, we're not really implementing a back and forth chat conversation, but this is really just a once-off. We'll ask it a question, it will go online, get the answer, and then come back to us. And that's why I'm using this specific agent type. So back in our code, after we've instantiated our agent, I'll just write a comment to the console to say that we've loaded the agent, and we can now pass a prompt to our application. So what we can do is we'll call our executor. On executor, we've got this call method. This call method takes an object as input, and we'll pass in a value called input, followed by our prompt. And I'll actually use the example from the Langchain documentation, which is, who is Olivia Wilde's boyfriend? What is his current age raised to the 0.23 power? This call method returns a promise, which we need to await, and I'll assign the response to a variable called res. Let's go ahead and write this to the console. So I'll say console log res.output. And we need to install the SERP API package. So in the console, let's run npm install -s SERP API. After that's installed, we can now run our file by typing node, and this time we'll run the agent file. We got the feedback for loaded the agent, and after a few seconds, we get this response back saying that Harry Styles is Olivia Wilde's boyfriend, and it's giving us his current age raised to the 0.23 power. So this is very cool. So our model was able to go onto Google, fetch this information from the internet, and then use the calculator tool to perform this calculation. We can also see the processing of this agent in action by specifying the verbose property in the executor. And I'll set verbose to true. Let's clear the console and let's run this script again. If you set verbose to true, it's like a debugging feature. So in the console, we can now see each and every step that the agent is executing. So after loading the agent, it's trying to run the chain with the input that we provided. Then it's passing this prompt to our model. It's then determined that it needs to go online and use the search tool to get this information. We can then see some of the results that came back from Google. And after getting the information about Olivia's boyfriend's age, the agent determined that it now needs to use the calculator tool for performing this calculation. So the verbose property is available on most of the components in Langchain, and it's a brilliant way of troubleshooting and debugging your application. I'm actually going to remove this for now. So next, let's talk about memory. So up until now, our interaction with the application has been quite straightforward. We pass in a prompt, get a response, and then the session terminates. So basically, our application is stateless. In Langchain, we can introduce the concept of memory to our models so that our model can remember our previous interactions. A good example of this would be a chatbot, where we want the model to remember the previous messages that we sent. So let's have a look at memory in Langchain. I'm actually going to close this file. In the root of our project, I'll create a new file. I'll just call it memory.js. Then at the top of the code, we need to import our environment variables. Then we will import OpenAI from Langchain/LLMs/OpenAI. We also want to import buffer memory from Langchain/memory. And since I want to create a simple little chatbot, we'll also import conversation chain from Langchain/chains. We first need to create our model, which I'll call model, which is equal to a new instance of OpenAI. If you want, you can specify the temperature, but I'll just leave it blank in order to use the default values. In order to use the buffer memory, I'll create a new variable called memory, which I'll set equal to a new instance of the buffer memory class. And we can now define our chain as well by creating a new variable called chain, which will set equal to a new conversation chain. Conversation chain takes in an object with two properties. For the LLM, we'll pass in our model, and for memory, we'll pass in our memory object. So let's test this out. We can now call chain.call. This takes an object as input with a property called input. I'll pass in something like, hi, I'm Leon. This call method is a promise which we need to await, and I'll assign that to a variable called response1. Let's write this to the console to see what the model comes back with. Okay, back in the terminal, I'm going to clear all of this. So back in our terminal, we can now run node and memory. And after a few seconds, we get this response back saying, hi Leon, I'm an AI. Nice to meet you. What brings you here today? So in our previous examples, this would have been the end of the whole chain. And there would be no concept of memory and no chance of the model remembering who we were. But let's see if the model can remember my name. So I'll create a new variable called response2, which will await chain.call, which takes in input. And what we'll do now is we'll ask it, what is my name? Let's now also write this to the console. So I'll say console.log response2. Let's test this out by running node memory. So the first response is this, "Hi Leon, nice to meet you." And then the second response just says, "You just told me your name is Leon." So this means the model was able to retain information within the session and it was able to recall my name using memory. What we can also do is stream the response from the model as it is generated. Up until now, we had to wait a few seconds for the response to come back, but we can use streaming to show the response as the model is generating it. So let's have a look at that. I'll actually create a new file called stream.js. In stream, we'll also import our environment variables. And let's also import OpenAI from Langchain. Let's also go ahead and create our model by calling new OpenAI. This takes in an object as input. But what we can also do is set the streaming property to true. And when streaming is set to true, we can also specify a callbacks property, which is an array of events. So I'll just create one object here and I'll call it handle LLM new token, which takes in token as input. Within this function, we can then call process.standardout.write, and we can pass in the token. Let's see what happens if we call the model now. So I'll await model.call, and let's pass in write a song about sparkling water. And let's save this. Let's go ahead and run this file by typing node stream. And let's press enter. And after doing this, you should see the response streaming back to us as the model is generating it. So I'm going to press enter. And as you can see, the response is now being streamed back to us. I think this concludes the first video in this series. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel and please like this video. In the next video, we'll take what we've learned so far to create our very first chat model. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.